When I imagine God as father or mother, everything's cool until bedtime. And then it can be really hard to figure out the parental message. Is God quietly telling her children, peace, be still? The biblical version of hush, go to sleep. Or is he energetically warning the kids, as we hear today in Luke's gospel on this first Sunday of official Advent, stay awake? What are we supposed to do? A few nights ago, I woke up with a start. That cold white light of a nearly full moon was pouring in our bedroom window, casting shadows on the bed, on my sleeping wife, on the pile of newspapers I'd been reading. Martha, I said urgently. She said. Something's burning, I hissed, poking her. I jumped up and I opened the window, breathing in deeply. Smoke. Yeah, I smelled smoke. But there were no sirens and the streets were silent. I sniffed anxiously, remembering the last fire, the last 4 fires in my rapidly gentrifying neighborhood, the Mission, where everyone worries that unscrupulous landlords will burn more long-time tenants out, collect the insurance, and then convert their shabby little low-rent apartments to fancy co-ops. Something's burning, I said again, remembering the elderly neighbors who'd lost their home, the 11-year-old girl who died in a fire set over her parents' corner grocery store, the boarded up windows on 22nd Street where 6 small businesses and 16 families were driven out by a blaze that left windblown ash in our own backyard. Honey, said Martha from the bed wearily, remember Renata next door told us they were having a barbecue? Go to sleep. Go to sleep. Stay awake. How do we know what to do? The truth is that something is burning. The whole world is burning. Luke's community knew this. They were living just 50 or 60 years after the death and resurrection of Jesus, only 15 years or so after the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. They could still smell the smoke. Luke wrote, knowing that the purpose of apocalyptic writing isn't to create dread about the future, but to encourage faithfulness during the upheaval and bewilderment and all too present pains of the present. To remind suffering people of the good news. Emmanuel is here with us. Your liberation is near at hand. And centuries past that particular apocalypse, the gospel speaks to us too, a people just as bewildered and suffering and in upheaval. The nations in agony are still fighting fire with fire. A mother's child is gunned down by police, dying helpless on a Chicago street. Women seeking health care are murdered in Colorado. Refugees fleeing violence are drowned in the turmoil of the waves. We see all these things taking place, wars, droughts, flames licking the walls of someone's apartment on Mission Street, the powers of heaven itself shaken. How can we not, like the people Luke writes to, faint away with fear and terror at what menaces the world? Watch yourselves, says the gospel, or your hearts will be coarsened by debauchery and drunkenness and the cares of life, and that day will come upon you unexpectedly like a trap. Well, it takes a lot less debauchery and drunkenness than you'd imagine to have your heart coarsened. I can coarsen mine with a cup of coffee. I just have to snap off the morning news and drive past the torn tents of the homeless on my way to church without catching anyone's eye. I just have to let what Scripture calls the cares of life become solely my cares about my life, my clothes, my dinner, my online profile. It's frighteningly easy for me to drift through the upheaval of these times asleep, narcoticized by the simple act of refusing to pay enough attention. But watching can be problematic too. It takes a lot less vigilance than you'd imagine to become completely paranoid. I can wake up in the middle of the night suddenly hyper alert, tuned to that one weird, scratchy sound outdoors, convinced that the neighbor's cat must be a raccoon, and the raccoon must be a man, and the man must be unholy death itself coming for me right this minute. Fear, after all, fear is another kind of narcotic, one that keeps you from paying enough attention to anything but your own terror. Oh, Emmanuel. Oh, Emmanuel, come save us. Salvation, thank God, does not depend on whether you or I happen to remain watchful enough at the right moment, in the right way. The good news is that God is in charge of the world, and God's kingdom is near, and our liberation is near at hand. But since I, like you, want to participate as fully as possible in that liberation, and I want to be fully alive in that kingdom, I badly need to learn how to be faithful to God's promise while the world is burning, how to stay awake, how to pay enough attention, how to stand up and hold my head high when every day seems like the end days, how to be still and trust God's love in the face of everything horrible I fear will happen. How, in other words, in Advent words, how to wait. Waiting is this universal common experience, and sometimes it just feels unbearable. Over the last 3 weeks, I waited a lot. I waited to see if my friend Gary was coming home safely from Paris, if my daughter's worrisome cough was going to turn out to be something serious, if friends and members of this congregation were going to lose their jobs or their homes or their spouses. Sometimes I tried to forget it all, to numb myself to sleep. Sometimes I stayed so wide awake I was grinding my teeth all night. But I kept trying to pray, and I was reading and rereading this little Advent message I've gotten years ago from Brother Curtis, one of the monks of the Society of St. John the Evangelist. It wasn't a complete cure for my fears, much less for the evils of this present time, but it was the sign I needed. Here's what Curtis showed me about how to pay attention while waiting. 3 things. 1, presume that God knows what you do not know. God is waiting on you to be ready, to be able to bear knowing more. God isn't in a rush and will wait for you. 2, there's a reason why today is not tomorrow. Don't cut in line. God, and thus your most abundant life, is in this present moment. 3, if you find yourself waiting anxiously, pray for the conversion of your anxiety. Converted anxiety is hope. Anxiety is dreadful expectation. Hope is expectant desire. They're like cousins to each other, like Mary and Elizabeth. If you are anxious now, you're almost hopeful. Something hopeful is happening in the wait. Something hopeful is happening in the wait. Emmanuel, God's love with us, is happening in the wait. And that huge, terrible apocalypse we fear is going to happen, that scary, scratchy sound in the night, that sickening despair, that's about human violence, human cruelty, and it's been happening for thousands of years. I don't have to force myself to stay awake to notice that. Instead, I need to pay attention to what God is doing. Even as the sky grows dark with lamentation, I need to watch how God is bringing salvation, to notice where God might be revealed, even in the midst of the real suffering we create for ourselves and for others. Without hope, I could get so easily distracted by my own anxieties or by whatever I do to numb them that I might miss God slipping into the world to love us and save us. Watch, says Jesus. Notice the fig tree. Every single seemingly barren branch has fruit coiled within it. So it is with the broken nations, where tender shoots of new life are waiting to emerge. So it is with our own coarsened hearts. This prophecy is humble. It's kind of like Micah's vision of heaven that turns out to be just an ordinary backyard, right? Where people are sitting down under their vines and fig trees with nobody bothering them. It's like the promise in today's O antiphon, Emmanuel, the King, the lawgiver, the desire and salvation of all nations, who turns out to be a small human child. If you are anxious now, you are almost hopeful. So peace, be still, and stay awake. Watch. Jesus promises that the signs of God's faithfulness can appear at any moment as water trickles from a rock, as a little piece of bread is broken, as a young woman nurses a new baby. And when we see those signs, we will know that our liberation is near at hand. Emmanuel, God with us, is right here, saving us as we wait.